What if the very pain you felt in that relationship was not accidental at all? What if it was studied, measured, and used as a tool to keep you stuck? This is something many people only realize after the fog finally lifts. And when it does, everything about the relationship suddenly starts to make sense. In the beginning, everything feels almost too good to be true. The attention is intense. The connection feels deep. You feel seen, valued, and understood. What many people do not realize is that during this early phase, something else is happening behind the scenes. The person you're dealing with may be carefully studying you. They pay close attention to how you react to certain stories, certain situations, and certain emotional topics. They may share something sad from their past and watch closely to see how compassionate you are. They may casually bring up something controversial just to see what makes you upset. They may even push small boundaries to see how far they can go before you push back. At the time, it does not feel like a test. It just feels like conversation. But those reactions give them valuable information. They begin learning your emotional triggers. They learn what hurts you, what scares you, what frustrates you, and what makes you feel responsible for fixing things. And later, that information becomes power. Because once the relationship moves out of that exciting early stage, the tone slowly changes. Confusing behavior starts to appear. Maybe you notice secretive actions. Maybe money disappears without explanation. Maybe you see things on social media that make you uncomfortable. Maybe they start acting distant or disrespectful. When you try to talk about it, the conversation goes nowhere. Questions get deflected. Responsibility gets shifted. Suddenly you're the one being told you're overthinking, imagining things, or causing drama. What is happening here is a pattern that keeps you emotionally off balance. Pain is introduced, then briefly relieved, then introduced again. When you discover something upsetting, your mind searches for answers. You want clarity. You want reassurance. You want the relationship to go back to how it felt at the beginning. But the only person who can supposedly provide that relief is the same person who created the confusion in the first place. That creates an emotional loop. Pain leads you back to them looking for comfort. They calm things down for a short time. Then the cycle starts again. And the more emotional the situation becomes, the harder it is to think clearly. Pain has a way of taking over your thoughts. Anyone who has experienced deep emotional stress knows how difficult it can be to focus, make decisions, or see things logically when you're constantly trying to fix the next problem. That is exactly why this pattern works so well. When you're overwhelmed with emotion, you're more likely to keep chasing explanations instead of stepping back and questioning the entire dynamic. But something powerful happens when awareness starts to grow. At some point, many people begin looking back and noticing the pattern. They remember those early conversations. They remember the strange tests. They remember how certain topics kept being used to trigger emotional reactions. And suddenly it becomes clear that the confusion was never random. Once that realization clicks, the emotional fog begins to lift. Because when someone realizes they no longer need the person who keeps creating the pain, the control begins to fall apart. The cycle stops working. The pressure loses its power. And for the first time in a long time, clear thinking returns. If you have ever felt trapped in an emotional cycle like this, know that understanding these patterns is often the first step toward freedom. Awareness gives you the power to respond differently. And once you recognize the difference, you give yourself the opportunity to move toward a life that feels calmer, clearer, and far more peaceful.